Hey, folks, have you ever thought about living with your family forever? Now, I know that might not be exactly your joy, but I'll tell you what, the way Gary positions this blew my mind. And I met Gary a while ago. Gary Klaben, welcome, and let's talk about this multi-generational living. What are we talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Kary. And yeah, and first of all, I want to thank your team at Igniting
Mm.
Souls because you guys made all this happen really well. And I've done books before, and this was a much better experience, a much better ride.
Wow.
So,
Well,
shout
thank
out
you.
to you and your team.
Thank you.
But yeah, this came about because somebody said to me 20
Mm.
years ago, "Hey, I'm thinking of building a few homes on this property so my family can all live together." And I remember when he said it to me, I went, "I want to do that."
Ooh.
And then it kind of stuck, had deep roots into my soul that over time made it happen. And that's kind of where it came from originally.
I
And
love that.
it was a guy in Strategic Coach who actually did that. In fact, Doug Andrews is his name, and I've told Doug that before, so he knows.
My son met you at the Free Zone, I believe it was, in Florida, but yeah, I think it was Florida. Um, he heard about you speaking about this, and he immediately said, "This is a 19-year-old," and he's like, "Well, that makes so much sense. I totally want to do that." And it wasn't, "I want to live with mom and dad in their basement forever," but the concept of multi-generational living. I want people to see you have this drone that is actually flying over your property. I think this
Right.
is probably one of the coolest things so people can see it. But by the way, folks, you got to go to multigenbook.com. What a cool URL there. Multigenbook.com. The website is fantastic. And let me read the subtitle. The proven guide to creating stronger families, boom, and smarter finances through intentionally designed shared spaces. Gary, I love everything about this book. I mean, the cover, the subtitle, the title, and then we come down here. What are we looking at right here?
Yeah, so this is a drone video that I had done a few months back, knowing we'd be putting the website up to give people at least a view of one, family estate, we call it, where we live multi-generationally. And there's 4 generations, 5 families. And so you're seeing some video of our property. It's a really beautiful property. It took us a while to find it. And we went through a bunch of, processes to get there, which, I'd love to be able to talk about a little bit.
Sure.
But you can see it's beautiful. There's about 200 feet of elevation change from the bottom to the top of the property. We've got everything most people want between water, streams, fields, forests, um,
Gee,
animals on our property as well, chickens and so forth, which we're
wow.
seeing here. Yeah.
So I am curious of a lot of things. I think you're going to blow their minds here because we really don't have a model for this. Even your book on Amazon, first of all, folks, check it out. Kindle, audio, hardcover, paperback. I told Gary this is the coveted 4 here. You have no excuse. You can pick any version, all the versions, multiple versions. But then we scroll down here and we see you creating these lasting family memories. And, the pictures are beautiful. But Gary, what does it feel like every day to wake up near your family?
You know, we're still trying to get used to it. It's been 4 years, but, we came in with 2 families.
Mm.
And it wasn't a Kevin Costner thing, build it and they will come. That wasn't the idea, but that's what happened. And interestingly enough, the oldest generation had kind of want to stay in their home, and then they realized that we were setting an environment up rather than going to a retirement community. They realized an environment was being set up where it would work really well for them, and they called us and said, "Can we live with you?" And we said,
Wow.
"Absolutely," because we knew we needed to be able to help them out with their, as they got older into their 90s. Now, my father-in-law just turned 90 a couple days ago, and my mother-in-law has since passed, but she had a great couple of years being there with surrounded by family. All of her daughters live there. I mean, I don't know how you could have it any better. Here's my father-in-law. He's a widower. He's got his 3 daughters that he does different things with pretty much on a daily basis. And he's got his grandson and great grandson, a granddaughter and great grandson there as well. It's just a very vibrant community. I grew up that way. I grew up in a little house with 9 siblings, and my mom and dad. And I was used to all this activity, so it's that part of it's very normal for me. I can see with my wife and others, it's harder because it's new, right? They're not used to having a lot of people around. But it's really fascinating because you can just be going along and all of a sudden run into somebody outside, whatever, talking about something. Maybe, hey, you want to have dinner later? We'll do that. Hey, I was thinking of going to the store. Are you going to run with me down to the Tractor Supply or something? Whatever. It just, all these things happen on a daily basis, very organically. And then we tend to end up having 1 or 2 meals a week together. And it's different groupings, who's available, who's around. And it just kind of happens. It's
Wow.
kind of, yeah.
That's so good. I mean, it is a dream. You look at where other cultures are. So first of all, certain cultures honor their elderly.
Absolutely.
We I could name cultures, but I'm not going to get into that. But certain cultures are historically known for taking care of their old, and there's other cultures that are known for almost like pushing them away. And
Mm-hmm.
yet your model seems so cool because it's you're right. I like that word, vibrant. And I'm sure you have stories about taking care of the horses or seeing,
Right.
beautiful flowers. I'm just curious, like, what does that do to your peace of mind? It sounds like it's way more than financial.
Yeah, you can get caught up in the work and the what needs to be done because you have a little town. I'm the mayor of a little town, and there's always many more things to do than as one gentleman that I
The
met,
mayor, I love that.
yeah, he said I run out of diesel fuel and sunlight before I'm done.
Oh
His
yeah.
property. When I was interviewing 20 different families who have done this, up to 100 years ago until recently. And it's interesting to hear their perspective. And we're still getting used to that. But my wife and I were sitting next to our pond under these 2 beautiful Norway maples just on Sunday.
Right.
And he said, if we were here and this was a B&B, we'd be telling everybody about it. Because you don't realize you're in this beautiful property that, wow, right, we got to enjoy this more, kind of not look at the work side as much and enjoy it. So yeah, you're trying to deal with the fun aspects in the relationship, but also improvements on the property and different things you're trying to do.
Let's talk about any tension or stress, because maybe somebody's watching this today and they're thinking like, I like parts of this, but your book is so good because it talks about some of those things related to rules or guidelines. You call
Absolutely. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So there's a stage, 4 stages to doing this that I identified after, again, interviewing, living it, talking to a lot of folks about it. And there's a statistic. It's a really sobering statistic I learned over 35 years ago, and is that in America and across the world, wealthy people generally, it's shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. What that means is 91% of families of wealth, it's all gone by the 3rd generation. Because
what was that phrase again that you said?
Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Huh.
If you go to Thailand, as an example, they'll say rice paddies to rice paddies in 3 generations. This is something that happens everywhere. A gentleman named Roy Williams and Vic Pressier wrote a book called Preparing Heirs, 5 Steps to be able to prepare them for this. And they did the studies on this. And 60% of the reason why that happens, trust and communication. Those 2 are missing. So in that first stage, we emphasize, guys, you want to go through and do trust and communication. And say, well, what's the big deal? I've got a family of 4. There's a total of 6 relationships. Well, when you add 3 families of 4 together, you go, well, that shouldn't be too hard. Well, it goes to 66 relationships. There's bound to be conflict between family members. And so this first stage is saying, hey, here's your trust communication. How do you deal with conflict resolution? And to your point, what are our governing guidelines? What are our core tenets and principles? What do we stand for? And then how do you take that down to how we will put together a charter for the family and some bylaws and actually some rules to live by, so we don't end up causing a lot of harm within the family and end up all the wealth is gone in 2 more generations. That's what will happen if you don't address that issue.
That makes sense. Okay. So trust and communication. What else do you talk about in the book? Because I think when I showed the drone picture a second ago, you said there was some strategy that went into the location?
That's a great question, Kary. So what I determined after a while was what we really did is and we talked about this. We did two things. We said, what are our negotiables and our non-negotiables?
Mm.
And the non-negotiables, we had 6 of them, and we had negotiables about roughly 20, something in that nature. Non-negotiable is we wanted no noise pollution and no air pollution. We wanted to make sure we had to be at least 20 acres, had to have both fields and forests, and had to have them water. But it had to have.
I like this. Yeah.
And which is really cool about that is it makes it so that you can walk away from these beautiful properties because they're just gorgeous, a lot of them. And you're like, oh my gosh, can't we make it work here? You got to be clear. These are our non-negotiables. And so we wanted all 6 to be present. And this property has all 6. And then hopefully you get 80% of the non-negotiables because there's no perfect property. So that's one set. The second set is then the preferences. Like, well, we got to be within 30 minutes of an airport, or we got to be within 30 minutes of healthcare facilities, or we have to have good schools. If we don't, we got to go to private school. I can go down the list. There's tons of these things. And so those are, after you get the trust communication, conflict resolution, your vision, and your governance, then you're setting up those things. So now you can go and look for the property. But there's a lot of prep here prior to that. Also, you want to do a financial stress test and an estate stress test because some families will have the entrepreneur fund the whole thing. Some families will have everybody come in together in an HOA kind of a way. And some families, and I think most do it this way, it's a combination of the two. So you kind of want to know what's this going to cost, because I got to tell you, with 19 HVAC systems and 8 in-floor heating systems, 4 wells, 5 septic fields, I can go down the list. Something breaks every week. And
wow,
the costs of running the property are very high. So you got to know going in, eyes wide open, hey, if we're going to do this, how are we going to make sure it doesn't fall on its face financially or cause a lot of stress with these families living together where they can't afford it? So that's prep work prior to that.
Oh my gosh. Property. Now that you said all this, I almost think like no one should do this until they read your book.
That's the reason I wrote it. The reason was, got on the property and I was in strategic coaching program you and I are in.
Oh yeah.
And we had a little breakout session. You usually ask, hey, what's going on in your life? There are 3 other people in the breakout. I said, I formed this, family estate on my compound. Just moved in a couple weeks ago. And a gentleman right away said, I want to do that. How do I do that? Well, I thought, okay, he's just one off. And then it happened again in another breakout the same day. And then it happened again a week later. And then it happened again. And I went, I thought I was the only crazy one thinking this might be something that's happening. But I'm realizing it's kind of like, Kary, it's that unasked question that we know is in the back of our head. Yeah. Somebody asks you that question, like, what age you're going to die? It's a strange question.
Yeah.
If I go out in the public right now and ask somebody that question and say, just give me a number, they'll pop a number out of their head. And then they'll say to themselves, where did that number come from? Where did it come from? I find this is very similar. Here's what it is. And they go, I want to do that. Why? I don't know. It's just, that's very appealing to me.
Yeah. It's almost like it's maybe it's hardwired into us.
I think that's true. And that's a whole nother book.
Yeah.
About we are herd animals at the fundamental level. And we live this way up until the last 150 years.
That's true.
We actually have a big experiment going on here in the United States with the nuclear family. It really is not the way we want to live. We're sending our young people out to places like New York City, and they're trying to make a living, and they're killing themselves, and they've got to pay for childcare and everything else, and everything is money related. So money's driving all the decisions.
Interesting.
Which can be a problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you do see some of these Western movies, or even middle-aged stuff. And you're right. You start looking at history and you start realizing that we used to hang together.
A lot in supported family. You didn't think about retirement and got to have money to be living independently from everybody else and don't want to bother the kids and want to make sure I take care of myself. And then you look at the studies, and they're horrible studies, and it shows loneliness in the United States starting around 65 goes down, down, down. The percentage of people that don't have somebody around, or the amount of loneliness goes up dramatically. So we have these seniors out there who don't see anybody, very rarely, extremely lonely, and they die of loneliness because we built this model that, oh no, we're independent, and we've never been independent as human beings. In fact, I think women, human beings are one of the only mammals that require another human being to help the birthing process. Even that is not alone.
Interesting.
And you look at this and like, we're not meant to be, an island unto ourselves, right? We're not meant to be that way. We're meant to be around others. And generally, for most people, if they've got a family, it's around the ones that they love, the ones that are close to, and the one they're going to receive this money or this estate or whatever you want to call it. And so this whole multi-generational living was born out of the fact that it bothered me at a very deep level, my founding story a little bit, a deep level of how I was going to be involved with families that weren't helping the second and third generation know how to deal with the wealth, and they're going to destroy them. And I didn't want to be involved in that. I wanted to make an impact with my clients. This is just taking it now even further.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going to head with this is this isn't your main business. This was a labor of love, and yet there's definitely a market for it. I think that's where we're headed. But what is your main business? Because I do think it definitely integrates now that
Absolutely. And this actually is part of my main business, as it turns out, because for the last almost 40 years, I've been doing multi-generational living planning. I've been meeting with family members in many environments. You can talk to a lot of my families, and I've met with them as groups many, many times. In over 10 or 20 years, we've been able to help the younger generations get educated about money, how they're going to receive this money. And now parents have died and grandparents have died, and the money's been passed to them, and they're not in that group of 91%. They're actually doing better than their parents with the money they left them, the assets they left them. Wow. So when this came about, I said, this is just an extension of that to how they live, as well as passing the money. So they really are very integrated. So I've been working on integrating this into my own business. And one of the things that we're doing now to help somebody who says to me, how do I do this, is I have a 2-day workshop on my property.
Wow.
Somebody coming there can see everything, and then here's these critical things you guys got to do before you go and buy that property. Because I found out that was the issue people were having. They didn't know where to start. They didn't know what they needed to do, and they're making lots of mistakes in the process of doing that. And fortunately, I spent 3 or 4 years doing this process and had watched a lot of my clients go through the process. So I had a lot of background already, but I still made some of those mistakes because, again, there wasn't anybody to go to how do you do this.
So you're basically now saying, look, before you make the big jump, come 2 days, see it. How cool is that? Rather than going to the Holiday Inn or something like that.
Right. And then we've got 6 different elements that they learn. I mentioned some of it already, so that they can walk away knowing 2 things. One, do I really want to do this? That's a key one. And number 2, a plan and path and plan of how to do this.
That's so good.
Here's the things to do. Because I said, if I had this when I was doing it, we would have done it in a year instead of 4 years. And we would have now made several mistakes. And the mistakes tend to be money mistakes or family relationship mistakes, I would say along those lines. And the folks I've interviewed who've done this, they said, oh yeah, I wasted $500,000 doing this over here because I didn't understand that's how this works on a, this complicated property. I spent $250,000 over here doing this when I could have done that. Just the dowser situation. We spent $60,000 in a well, and the next time we did a well, it was 20 because we got a dowser. And people say,
I don't even know what that is.
Dowser is someone who has been trained in being able to locate water underground. And they're actually used by a lot of municipalities in many, many areas. And in fact, one of our folks that came out to service our leach field, for our septic system, He said, "Hey, I hope you don't mind. I'm using my dowser sticks to locate it." And we just laughed because we knew about it. And sure enough, he found it right away, and he knew exactly where everything was by using his dowser sticks because it tells him where the water is.
Wow. See, I mean, I got to tell people, listen, for the cost of this book, come on now, folks. For the cost of this book, $10 Kindle, $26 hardcover. You'll keep it as a tool for the rest of your life. $16. Like, come on now. So we're going to get this book. It's going to blow our minds. It's going to raise the awareness. It's going to show us how this makes a ton of logical and relational sense. And then if people really want to go to the next level, you have these things quarterly or annually that.
Yeah, we're just starting them because what I did, which I normally don't do as an entrepreneur, is I actually spent almost 4 full years completely understanding the space I was living in, because I realized if I was going to do this, I wanted to make sure I understood it wasn't just a one-off me. So that's why I interviewed 20 other families and wrote a whole white paper on that, because I said, well, I've got to see how others do it, And then independently, I've been going on other family estate visits. So when people are living multi-generationally, I'm going to see how they're living. And every time I go, I learn something new. And what I'm learning is I'm relearning what we lost institutionally 150 years ago. I'm relearning a lot of this stuff, but it's being upgraded for the wealth we now have. We didn't have this before. People were just living off the land, surviving, doing their thing, living to 40 or 50 years old and moving on. We're now living a lot longer. There's more generations. It's a little more complex, but the same human elements keep showing up. Just how we apply the new technology to it, or the new ways we can live more comfortably, than we could in the past.
Is it fair to say that I'm setting you up, so I don't care if you say yes. Is it fair to say that this book and your research and these 20 families you've interviewed, that this is probably the most comprehensive work on multi-generational living?
I believe so.
It feels like it to me.
Yeah, because I think others have taken the couple books I reviewed, I saw on this from years ago, or out there, took it from the relationship aspect. I was already biased from the position of this shirt sleeve, the shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which I did not want to be a party to. So I was making sure I was reaching deep into my families. I've been doing this for years. So when I saw this, I said, well, look at how that matches up. They're going to have this wealth. It's going to pass on. Now they can pass on their values, who they are, what they stand for, and everything right through this property. And they're not leaving them a bunch of stocks and bonds, or they're leaving them an actual legacy estate property that they love as well, that they can now do what they want to do generationally. There's a 7th generation philosophy, the Iroquois tribe. Came up with, years ago. We found out over there when we came to this country. And it goes like this. When they meet for major decisions, the chief would say, okay, remember, the decision we make today, how does it affect the 7th generation? I said, why the 7th generation? Because nobody living today, no child that was just born, will ever know the 7th generation. So you will make decisions without any connection, anything to that. So when we make decisions, we do it that way. So you change your philosophy. You're looking at the land differently. You're going to be prudent stewards of the land. It changes everything. You don't look at the property as an expense. You look at it as an investment. I mean, you can go down the list. It changes a lot of different ways you look at this.
Is this why you dedicate it to the 7 generations?
Yeah, and exactly. I was trying to plan it. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother I knew up till I was 10, 12, 13 years old. And now I have a great-grandniece. And there's 7 generations between.
That is cool, man.
Yeah.
I love the stages: foundational development, structure, the living estate transaction, the transformation. I mean, this is the map. I mean, gee, my 19-year-old son is probably already thinking.
Yeah, he's going to want this. And interesting is I could have wrote a 700-800 page tome because I get into all the details, but I realize that I'm talking to an audience of folks who want to kind of get it quickly,
Yeah.
but then they don't want to be into all the details
Yeah.
right away. That's coming later.
Yes.
How you do all that. But this is really to solve the man or the woman who says, I want to do that. How do I do that?
That's right.
I wrote it that way rather than, because I've had some people where you go, hey, you didn't get into all the details. I said, well, that's a different book, than this book.
This is really the why, the philosophy, and then you start getting into the how, but you expose them enough to say, wow, I'm interested in that. And I think their next step should be, I'm booking a trip. I mean, that's what I would do, before you weigh in with all the expense and time, like book a trip, see it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when I've mentioned what we're doing in the workshop, which we came up with about 3 months ago, several people said that's brilliant, because when they're there learning this, they'll do a tour of our property, tour of our family. They'll have dinner with our family. It kind of, they put them in a setting where they can see themselves there or not. Now, I want them to decide yes or no first, because you don't want to go down this path if it's not the right path, and it may not be.
That's
number
right.
one. And number two, if you are going to go down this path, you want to have enough knowledge to go, okay, we can't just short shrift this. We have to make sure we go through this before we move on.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Gary, thank you for doing this, because I know books are a labor of love.
Yes, they are.
I'm finishing one of mine as we speak, but yet I'm always transformed. Maybe I know you're a multi-book author, but don't you feel like on the other side, you're also like a different person?
Absolutely. Especially this one. This one, every book's been different, but this was definitely much more different, mainly because it's who I am. I mean, I told you I'm a family of 12, and I've always been connected to family. I'm the one in my family everybody comes to for any issues. I've always been wired like this. So this is just right down who I am.
Well, as we close, there's a guy named Ed Milet. Maybe you've heard of him, but he's an author and speaker. But he literally says, in every family, there is the one. And he's not as an egotistical, but he's like the one that people lean on, depend on, go to. And I really feel like this multi-generational living book, if you are the one in your family, like, read it, you might affect 7 generations. So
absolutely. 100%. And I got to tell you, I mean, just in our last coach session, 2 more people came up and said they wanted to do this. How do we do this?
I love that.
Yeah.
So folks, multi-gen book, by the way, I love that, multigenbook.com, and the book's on Amazon. It's available wherever books are sold, and get your copy today, and then schedule a trip with Gary's property. Gary, thanks for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. And Kary, thank you. You were instrumental, by the way, in doing the subtitle. I give you credit for, because
well, I was able to pull it out of your brain. So
yeah, no, thank you. It was very, very nice. I appreciate it.